Today I'm talking with Dave Gemmel. He's an associate director of the NED Ministerial Association. He received his doctorate of ministry with an emphasis in multicultural leadership from Fuller Theological Seminary in 1992. He began pastoring in the San Francisco Bay Area in 1978. In this interview, we cover 7 forms of clergy misconduct. Number 1, minimizing emotional abuse as a marriage problem. Number 2, blaming you for his use of explicit media. I've interviewed over 200 women on my podcast, and most of them share how when they talk to the clergy about their husband's use of explicit media, they were told that they needed to meet his needs more. Number 3, advising you to submit. Instead of getting help, many women are told to serve their emotional abuser. Number 4, offering spiritual counseling without any abuse training. Number 5, it's a red flag if clergy wants to meet with a vulnerable woman alone. Number 6, dismissing a woman's intuition. Clergy often will tell women to follow the spirit, but then when they go in and say they think there's something wrong with their husband, they try to convince her that's not the case. Number 7, protecting emotional abusers in leadership. Many churches still protect abusive men in power. Silence isn't neutrality. It always sides with the lies. All right, Dave, I am so grateful that you're here to talk to me about this today. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Ann. It is a delight to be with you, and I love your mission. BTR aims to protect women from emotional abuse, psychological abuse, and sexual coercion. We are on the same page.
Let's just dive right into talking about clergy sexual misconduct. Many think clergy sexual misconduct pertains only to preying upon minors. Could you please define clergy sexual misconduct?
Yeah, that's a mouthful, isn't it? Clergy sexual misconduct. Typically, we think of all the stories in the news, stories of the Catholic Church with pedophilia, abusing little boys in the church. And so that's what comes to mind when we think of clergy sexual misconduct. But the scope is actually a lot bigger than that. If I could just give a little preface here before we jump into it. Clergy, many, if not most, have advanced education and have been carefully screened before endorsement by their congregations. Most are highly trained, behave with great integrity and professionalism. Having said all that, there is a segment of volunteers and professional clergy who violate sacred trust, and in doing so damage the reputation of all clergy. That's the segment that we're going to zoom in on today. So what is clergy sexual misconduct? It's a betrayal of sacred trust, as I mentioned. And it can be on a continuum of sexual or gender-directed behaviors by either a lay or clergy person with a ministerial relationship, whether they're paid or unpaid. Here's some of the things it can include: abuse, adult sexual abuse, harassment, rape, sexual assault, sexualized verbal comments or visuals, unwelcoming touch and advances, use of sexualized materials, including pornography, stalking, sexual abuse of youth or those without capacity, consent, or misuse of the pastoral ministerial position. And it includes sometimes criminal behaviors that are against the law in some nations, states, and communities. So that's an official definition of sexual misconduct by clergy. That's in the Book of Discipline of the United Methodist Church, which is one of the best that is out there.
So, in your definition, you said gender directed behaviors. Are you talking about misogyny?
Yeah, that absolutely is misogyny, and that is proclaiming that women are not as valuable as men, and men have the right to dictate women's behavior.
Let's talk about your contention that pastors can't have affairs with church members and why, when people say, oh, he had an affair with a member of his congregation, that's just not a thing.
We hear about that sometimes where a spiritual leader had an inappropriate relationship with a member of the congregation, and we write it off as an affair. But I don't believe it's an affair. Here's why. The word affair implies mutual consent between two adults. But there's an asymmetrical role between pastor and congregant. In other words, the pastor has spiritual authority, which does not put them on the same playing field. That's why it's asymmetrical. So any sexualized relationship between a pastor and a congregant, I believe, is clergy sexual misconduct. and cannot be considered mutual consent. Even if it's not physical coercion, the clergy is the one in a position of spiritual and emotional power and must be held responsible for the abuse of power. So, any sexual relationship between a spiritual leader and a member is not having an affair. It is clergy sexual misconduct.
Thank you for making that so clear. It's the same type of thing where can you have an affair with your therapist? And the answer to that is also no, because he's in a position of power. His role is to treat you for a mental illness. I think that that would fall into the same category there in terms of therapy or other professionals.
Absolutely. And a therapist should lose their license and be barred from practicing. It's on a continuum. And the reality is, there are some sexual predators who've managed to become clergy. The biggest study was done from the Journal of Scientific Study of Religion, titled Prevalence of Clergy Sexual Advances Toward Adults in Their Congregations. It was a twofold study. Victims of clergy sexual misconduct were studied from a wide range of religions. They are asked to tell their stories of abuse. And in almost all of these cases, the clergy offenders, in a series of small acts, broke down the natural defenses, took advantage of a position of spiritual power to eventually sexualize the relationship. Well, what do we call that? That's a sexual predator. And somehow there's a few of these sexual predators that have managed to get in among the ranks of spiritual leaders. It's so dangerous. And here's why: because the victims and the families and the congregation did not seem to notice it or refuse to confront the clergy. So there's this special fog in a congregation that people aren't looking for that. And so they don't see it. And it makes a nice cloaking place for these sexual predators in the ministry.
Would you say this also applies to people in some type of religious authority, even if it's just volunteer, when they're not their congregants? So, for example, a neighbor who thinks, oh, this man is amazing because he's a pastor. He might not be her pastor, but some religious title. In my church, we would call it like a priesthood calling. So even if they don't belong to their same congregation, do you find that these types of predators, they use their titles for grooming others, not just people in their congregation?
Predators use whatever tools they can. And if they can use a spiritual position, they'll do whatever they can to achieve their goal.
I think it's an automatic way of gaining people's trust. So what steps can churches take in the prevention of clergy sexual misconduct?
A couple things. First of all, make sure that at least 50% of your search committee or your policy committees or your boards or however your church or synagogue is set up, 50% need to be women. And here's why. I believe God created man and woman, and man and woman complete humanity. If you just have one gender, you only get half of the picture. And so if there's only men on these committees, you're half blind. Many times women can pick up on things that men were clueless to. So it's just imperative that there is 50% at least on all these committees. Does that sound wild to you? That's my goal.
I think it sounds amazing. In my particular faith, that is not even an option right now. And so I'm like, oh, that would be a miracle. Like if a woman complained and said, hey, this was creepy, so many men would just be like, oh, he's just a nice guy. Don't worry about it. You're overreacting. And so to have women make up 50%, that would make a huge difference because men seem to dismiss women's statements about factual things or their intuitions that something isn't quite right.
Because most of us men have not experienced those advances that are unwanted. To us, it's just completely off our radar. It's something we can't relate to. And many women have. And so immediately they pick up on it. That's why we need women in these decision making positions.
I love that. I'm going to pray for that in my own faith.
When a congregation or a group is selecting a spiritual leader, got to check references. We do that in business. How much more important it is in spiritual life. Now, when I say check references, that's not just checking the resume and making the cursory calls that are on the resume, but it's calling previous congregations and talking to people in previous congregations, others that have worked with them, and dig and dig and dig. And if this person is a sexual predator, things will pop up. It may not be real obvious, but 3 or 4 phone calls and following some threads, it may be possible to uncover it.
Let's talk about how the position of clergy in and of itself can be problematic for someone who has an exploitative character.
This is really the heart of our conversation right now. This may sound radical, but let me say, don't go to your pastor or your bishop for counseling. That's a no-no. It's very dangerous to go to pastors or spiritual leaders for counseling. And here's why. Formal training of pastors and particularly lay leaders does not equip them to engage in counseling. Counseling is full of supervised counseling that takes thousands of hours before you become certified. It takes certification by state and governing bodies.
So many victims go to clergy for spiritual counseling. What's the difference between spiritual counseling and the counseling you're talking about?
Yeah, that's a good question. Spiritual counseling, I don't think that's appropriate. I think it's much better in a support group to develop those spiritual skills and insights. As far as one-on-one counseling, I think that's out of the question, whether it's spiritual or otherwise.
One thing that I suggest is if you're going into clergy to report your husband's abuse, his porn use, his sexual coercion, any type of abuse, emotional or psychological abuse, always take another woman with you who understands abuse. From our experience, you are at the greatest risk of him giving you bad advice or saying things like, well, just have more sex with him, or how many times do you have sex? We get the craziest things that clergy has said to victims of abuse. Are you making dinner? Are you praying? Stuff like that.
That's a great suggestion. And that leads me to don't meet with the pastor by yourself.
Ah, we're on the same page. Yay.
We are. We are. This is not rocket science here. This is just a simple practical device that comes out of years and years of bad practice. So we need to turn it around and have a good practice. So here's some suggestions. Don't meet with the pastor by yourself. If you do, find places to meet people where you can be observed by others. All right. So I don't know if the pastor has an office. If so, the office door should be open. There should be someone within eyesight of the office. I would suggest if there's not an office, meet at a public place, coffee shop, ice cream shop. If we're in Salt Lake City, ice cream shop. Most of all, choose a place where you feel safe. And if you want to bring a friend with you, that will really increase the safety awareness.
Let's talk about that for a minute. So many women are going to clergy to be absolved of their own sins. They're embarrassed. They don't want anyone else to know. What would you tell women in this scenario who are ashamed of some of their own behavior? They want to repent and they're thinking, I don't want to tell my mom so my mom can come in with me to speak to my bishop or my pastor, or perhaps some scenario like that. What advice would you give for women in that situation?
Yeah, well, we'll get into a theological discussion right now because I'm not into that at all as a pastor. I think that's between them and the Lord. If they want to have a support group, this group is a great place to do it. As a spiritual leader, I don't want to be looking out at my congregation and know specifically what their sins are. I mean, that's just crazy.
That's very interesting. So that would be a theological difference, obviously, between yours and my faith. Because in my faith, you're expected to confess serious sins, and that's a part of the repentance process. You also would get that in like the Catholic faith, confession, and there's several other faiths who believe in that spiritual practice of confession.
Absolutely. Again, this is theological. I don't believe, as a member of the clergy, that I have any absolving power over sin. That's something that is between God and the person. So that's not a power that I believe I've been bequeathed with. But yeah, we can get into a theological discussion.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for your insight. So thank you for sharing that. I've actually never considered that that's not clergy's role before until right this very second talking to you. If you have anything else you want to add, I'm happy to hear it.
Yeah. Well, we can have a Bible study sometime and take a look at it. That would be fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. You're opening my mind. Thank you. For the purposes of this podcast, let's continue talking about the guidelines that can keep congregants safe?
A couple other things. Keep messaging professional. So, whatever the messaging is, whether it's a phone call, whether it's a text, whether it's an email, look at that text, that messaging, make sure that it is professional, that it doesn't, well, you use the word creepy. And that is that there's nothing in there that says that this relationship is or could be something more than what it is already, a professional relationship. And if it goes beyond that, the bells should be going off and say, hey, there's a problem here. So here's some things to do to prevent that from happening. If it's email, reply back and CC some people and so that they can see what's going on. If it's text messaging, increase it to a group message with some trusted people. Phone calls, make sure you have someone in the room with you when you're having that phone call. Put it on speakerphone if you have to. So, all of these things will provide safety barriers from someone on the other end who may be, and you don't know for sure, may be a sexual predator.
I'm so grateful that you're talking about this in such a candid way. Thank you so much. So, for the purposes of this podcast, since my listeners are victims of emotional and psychological abuse and sexual coercion from their husbands, who often go into clergy, and in my particular faith, the clergy is volunteer, none of them are highly trained. But I have heard stories from all faiths that frequently clergy doesn't understand abuse and gives victims of abuse harmful counsel.
That may not be considered clergy sexual misconduct, but it certainly is unprofessional and does not fit with the sacred trust of ministry. I would call it pastoral misconduct or clergy misconduct in general.
Yeah, so let's talk about this. My podcast is interfaith, so I speak with women who are Catholic, Baptist, Jewish, every denomination of every different type of faith. And women are reporting that these interactions with clergy are really traumatizing when they go in to talk about their husband's abuse. They receive responses like, you need to have more sex, or you need to be a biblical woman and submit. So, specifically to my listeners, when they're not in the scenario of experiencing clergy sexual misconduct, meaning there's no sexual relationship happening with clergy, but they are experiencing clergy misconduct in general because they're getting misinformation when they go for help.
I'm going to give just a really easy answer. Don't go to your pastor for marital counseling. Honestly, I mean, I have my doctorate and I do not consider I have enough education to do marriage counseling. And if I begin, I am outside of my knowledge base and I am bound to be giving some stupid advice. So I'd rather not do that. And for your listeners, I would rather that they don't get stupid advice either. If they're going to someone who knows less than they do, I mean, what's the point? That's a waste of time. Go to someone that actually has competency in that area.
Women also report going to family or marriage counseling and having it go off the rails as well and not keep them safe. So this isn't just a clergy issue. This is a serious societal issue about people not understanding emotional and psychological abuse, how to spot it, and how to help victims get to safety. Similarly, my advice to our listeners is don't go to a marriage and family therapist because they are bound by their licensing to see it as an equal problem. With an abuse situation, you really need a professional who genuinely understands emotional and psychological abuse and sexual coercion, because it's not just a communication issue where you're going to go and just improve your communication and things are going to get better.
And I would advise those that are in a position of spiritual power, work with groups such as yours that really have good skills in these areas.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So that's what we specialize in, emotional and psychological abuse and sexual coercion, especially when it's difficult for people to see it. Even victims themselves, when they're not educated about it, it's very difficult for them to even understand what's going on. When we educate women about it, they're like, oh, now this is very clear. So let's go back to clergy sexual misconduct. If there's anyone listening who has experienced this or is experiencing it currently, I'm sure that there are many listeners whose husbands are pastors or whose husbands are clergy who they know that their husband has had sexual misconduct with one of the congregation members. This is the wife of the pastor who is aware of her husband's sexual misconduct. So I would say it's more likely that would be who is listening in this scenario. However, I'm sure there's also women who have experienced the sexual misconduct themselves.
And that number is not small. Referring to that previous study, over 3% of women in any congregation have experienced clergy sexual misconduct. So it's not a small group of people. And I'm imagining that if maybe one of your listeners right now has experienced it and they're listening to it and they say, yeah, that's me. What do I do about it? I think the first thing you need to know, it's not your fault. It's a sexual predator's fault, not yours. You are a victim. You're a victim of clergy sexual misconduct. So don't feel guilty about it. And if you're ready and you have support, speak up. And then find people that can walk on that healing journey with you.
And what would you say to the many, many wives who know about their husband's sexual misconduct and who have not been removed from their positions? In fact, I mean, we have over 60,000 women in our community, and we're hearing stories of this frequently where their husband uses pornography, for example, or he's had an affair, not necessarily with a member of the congregation, but with somebody, and he has shown he doesn't have sexual integrity or integrity at all because he's lied about it. What would you say to wives in that scenario?
If the evidence is clear and you're willing to take the risk, take that evidence to the person that's overseeing your husband and make it clear your husband should not be holding that office.
Yeah. We've had lots of women who have done that and then they've just been dismissed. So that's the thing that's really difficult for women is they sometimes try and then it just gets exhausting.
It's tough. You got to have a support team with you. To do it all on your own and you're being gaslighted just makes it more and more difficult. So you need to have that strength of a community behind you because every step you take, it gets ratcheted up on the other side. So you have to be strong. And to be strong, you've got to have people behind you. You got to have a group of people that can listen to you, believe you, support you, and encourage you.
Well, I appreciate everything you've shared today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Ann.